Hi everyone, this is Ben. Today I'm going to show you one of the glove mods that I do using the leather to reinforce our lacrosse gloves. The version I'm going to do is the heavier version that I do. This is the one that I usually use for tournament fighting and for most of practice sparring that I do with heavy steel. It still has some risks to it. It doesn't completely protect you as well as some of the heavier gloves do, especially the ones made for HEMA. But it works well for me and it's something that I prefer. So I'm going to kind of go over a quick little tutorial on how I make those so people who are interested can do their own, and hopefully so that we can get other people in our group using them and making them instead of me as well. There's also a light version that I'll probably send a separate video for, and the lighter version is really just kind of takes about half the time to make and is really just for kind of the fundamentals class to kind of get them involved in some very, very light sparring stuff. It's not appropriate. That version is not appropriate for heavy sparring with steel or anything along those lines. So, alright, let's get started. Alright, to get started, the pair that we're working with today are these blue STX gloves. To begin with, you want a pair that's a decent pair of lacrosse gloves. You don't want one that is just kind of the very bare minimum padding that you can get on some of these models. This one's okay. It's not, you know, there's some really fantastic versions out there that are very protective. But this one's good enough for kind of what we're doing as a model today. So what you're seeing is, I mean, you've got some pretty decent padding, you've got some metal reinforcement plates in there, you've got a little bit of side finger protection, which is okay, not as much as I'd like to hope for a really good pair, and a pretty hefty thumb as well. I mean, it's your kind of your run-of-your-mill minimum standard lacrosse glove that you want. Obviously, in alone of itself, not appropriate for steel sparring within what we do for HEMA. But hopefully kind of what we do today will make it a little bit more so. So what are we doing is we've got this leather, and we've got these pre-punched, pre-fit patterns that we use for TSG. There are actually, the way the design goes is we have one for the right hand and for the left hand, and they actually they're slightly different. The right hand one is this, and it actually has got this curve to it because the hand position at the end we were looking for is not this kind of a position, which some of the kind of mitten gloves you get are really designed for your hand to close like this, and it's not a very natural position. So this, when it's done, it'll allow your hand to close more like this with kind of a looser grip, which is what you would want out of your, I'm using the wrong hand, but it's what you want out of your dominant hand. For the non-dominant or the left one, what we end up having here is this, we have an actual separate finger for the index finger will be out here so that you can actually have a separate index finger with the backhand that's doing some of the Vinden stuff that we do. And these will probably need to be trimmed a little bit. This is just a really rough beginning pattern. Also, the holes aren't pre-punched, but they should come for anything we give the TSG. We basically are going to make all these kind of templates available to anybody in TSG that wants one. And they'll come with pre-cut in the general pattern along with pre-punched holes on the bottom, so that all you really have to do is sew them on. And I'll show you how these fit in a second, because they're actually not quite intuitive how they fit on the glove either. The other thing we got is we've got just a bunch of these little kind of leather strips. These are basically for kind of our finger reinforcement, which we'll get to in a second. And they should also be pre-punched along the sides with holes as well. So those are kind of what we're starting with. Let's jump in here. So we're going to start with the right hand, and we're going to start with doing the fingers on the right hand. So the way we do the fingers is we use these strips of the leather here, and we basically, our goal with this is to wrap it around the tip so that we reinforce the finger, mostly for compression damage. The part of the leather cap will go over the top here to kind of keep some of the crushing damage down, but this basically keeps it from being able to compress, so it helps prevent some of that compression damage in the fingertip. As a way of an example, when you've got that wrap, you can get quite a bit of force on the top of the finger and keep the finger from getting crushed, at least at first. Now these will have to be replaced every once in a while because the leather softens up, and after a while this stops doing what it should be doing. But for the most part, it actually is pretty effective for a very simple solution. So primarily, if you really are interested, you can tip every single finger. Way I do my gloves is I particularly tip the index finger and the thumb, and the other ones are covered a little bit by the overlap of the over the top leather, which we'll get to in a bit. So what we really want to do is we want the edge of this leather to start kind of right before the articulation. And we want to make sure that as the finger articulates that you are not, it's not getting tripped up, that you have enough clearance to move. So I'm going to have the finger tip wrap around, and you'll see that this piece is a little too long. So what I'm going to end up doing is I've got an X-Acto knife here. I'm going to go ahead and just trim some of the last bit off of this so we can kind of shorten it to fit better. And then I'm going to re-punch holes in it as well so that we make sure it looks the way it should. So here I've got my finger. Let me just double check this again. It wraps, and I've got pretty much most of the end tip of that finger, which is just kind of what I want. You want this to be protective, but you also don't want it to get in the way of the movement of the joint itself. What I'm going to do is I've got a phone book here to keep my scratching my table and getting me in trouble. But essentially what I'm going to end up doing is I'm going to kind of just score off the back of this, so that instead of me having a complete square at the back, that it's going to taper down to a thin edge near the bottom. And it doesn't take much more, honestly, than taking your blade. And of course, there are actually leather tools that you can use just to do this way easily. But we're just going to do this kind of with an X-Acto knife, which is probably what most of us are going to have access to at this point. So we're just going to kind of score down the end of it a little bit, just kind of working off the edge so that we get to a fairly thin tip at the end. You'll notice this is dyed, so you're gonna get some of that natural leather back. If you care about that, you can re-dye it. We're not worried about that at the moment. Just gonna kind of score it out. And it doesn't have to be perfect. All I'm trying to do is actually just kind of make this a little bit thinner so that, oh, that was a mistake there, so that as it comes to the finger, that it lays a little flatter, a little smoother, and doesn't get in the way so much. I'm going to do that on both ends as well, so I'm going to kind of work this end as well. Now you actually don't have to do this. It's fine, actually, if you just want to leave it as a square, it works just as fine. To me, I feel like the mobility is a little bit enhanced this way, but maybe it's my imagination. It does look a little better, that's for sure. Smoothing it up a little bit. Now, so I've cut the leather up and I've trimmed it a little bit. You'll notice that we had pre-punched holes on this side. Because I've cut the leather off on the other side, I'm going to want to re-punch my holes. And pretty much the same thing I've got here. I've got a foam book, and here's our leather awl that I can basically use just to put a couple holes down the side. Now if you want, actually, you can take, I like to take a piece of foam underneath this, so that I get a little bit of movement through with the awl. Just punch 4 or 5 holes in the end, just enough so that you can lace it. And I actually taught one right in the back here a little bit. So there I have my leather. Next we'll move to sewing it on. So when it comes to sewing, we are basically going to be using this artificial sinew, which you can use a lot of different things. This has worked really well for us, so that's what I tend to use. Set of pliers and a needle. So choice of needle, there's a lot of options, right? So a lot of people like these curved needles for threading things through. They actually work really well. The problem I found with them is that they break quite easily, and I go through a lot of these. I find that the straight ones tend to be a little easier for me to pull through. But you can use anything you really want. I'm using a needle with a sharp point. It doesn't have to be. It can be a tapestry needle with a dull point. But you make sure at least it's got a fairly large eye in the back. And then, so I'm using the sinew, and I'm going to basically start by tying off a piece on one end. I'm going to just go ahead and cut myself a piece of sinew, and I just kind of cut a fairly long length here, just so I know I have enough. And I'm going to thread my needle through. Large eye is pretty important because it's sometimes really hard. This sinew is fairly thick, and a normal size needle is obviously not going to cut it. I'm going to just go ahead and start by anchoring off one side of this. this needle in our thing. And you'll notice that when you get the needle through that the awl hole, you can get a larger awl, but the one that we have and the one that most people are going to get with the TSG toolkit is going to be probably make a kind of regular size hole here, but most of your needles aren't going to fit through easily, so you're going to have to pull the needle through with the pliers most of the time. So what I'm going to do is just going to tie it off. And there's a lot of different ways to tie it off. We're just going to do something very simple and just do kind of 2 overhand knots. So overhand, overhand. At the end of that, I'm just going to do kind of like a surgeon's knot. So I've got my just double knot right there. What I'm just going to do is I'm going to put another loop in that last knot. Just a single strand of it, like this. And I'm going to pull that knot as close as I can to the other one. So what that kind of does, as you can see, is it allows that knot to kind of, as I pull tension on it, as it keeps that knot in there tight. Keeps it from slipping. This actually does a pretty good job for the most part. It's ugly. There are cleaner, nicer, prettier ways of doing this, but that's not really what I'm going for. If you know a better way, go ahead and do it. If you like it prettier, go ahead and do it. That's fine. So then what we're going to end up having is we're going to need to anchor the tip on so that we can get started sewing it. And you can start on either end depending whether you want to start inside or outside. It doesn't particularly matter. I'm going to start by anchoring this tip to the end of my glove. I'm going to do that just using some regular old sewing pins. There's nothing really special about those. And I'm going to do is place the tip on kind of where I want it, into that finger, and just take a couple pins and stick them through the holes. So you can kind of keep this in place long enough to start your sewing. Just do a few on each end. It doesn't really need to stay there. It's not going to stay in very well. It doesn't need to be anchored in there permanently. You just kind of need to get it into place so you can get the first couple of stitches through. I mean, it works pretty well after that. So I've got that in place. What I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of measure where I want to start the sewing. And I'm really basically, there's a lot of different stitches you can do. We have to replace this fairly often, so I don't do anything too pretty. We just want to do something very utilitarian and quick and also durable. So I just basically do a looping stitch through. You can either do it through the hole first and come through the material second, or you can come up through the material first and then through the hole and come out. It doesn't particularly matter each way. I've already kind of started it this way, so I'm going to come through the material at least on the very first stitch. So I'm just kind of picking a place where I've already gotten. I'm going to find the hole, go through the material, up through the hole, and once I've gotten it there, I'm going to pull it through with the pliers. Kind of get that first loop in there. Double check it, make sure that I didn't pull things out, that nothing bunched up, it's kind of where I want it, and then I can keep moving from there. Now I actually can switch stitches at this point. If I really wanted to go the first one, I kind of sometimes do a couple loops through, but you don't have to. And then, but I'm going to just keep kind of going with what I got, loop it through the fabric, punch it through the hole, pull it on through. What we're just going to do is we're going to repeat that. I'm going to repeat that all the way up until we get through the top. Alright, now so I've looped it up through I've kind of sewed it up through the top. When you get to the leather, you can sew through the leather just as well as you could through the cloth. It's fine. Even if you have a dull needle, you can actually punch through most of this kind of thin leather fairly easily with a dull needle. I have the sharp one, so it's not too much of an issue. It did come off at this time on this side. That's okay. Don't need to worry about that. It's in place long enough. The stitching is okay. I'm going to keep going through. Now I've gotten to the top. I kind of want to anchor it off. You just don't want to leave it hanging too much because it can put, if you get like into a grapple or something, you can end up getting that pulled off a little bit and pull the stitching away. So I'm just going to do a couple more loops through. I'm going to do one through the side here and back up through the hole. And then I'm going to do one in a second here through the top as well, just to kind of double anchor it down. Pull it. And so I'm going to come around the top as well, so I'll have one that way. You can feel free to go right through the padding and everything. Should work just as well. Sometimes I'm a little coarse with it. It's okay, so it ends up being pretty much like that. And then I'm going to do is just tie it off. I tie it off the same way I tied it up. I'm going to do it with double overhand loop followed by that kind of surgeon knot at the end. So one, of course I've lost my needle, so let me re-thread that. So I want to loop it back through the existing stitch. Two. There are probably people out there who have a lot of leatherworking experience could show us better ways to do this, but this has worked for us well. And then I just kind of do that one last little loop through just the end here. Once again, trying to get that loop as close to the main knot as possible, so that I end up with that position there. So you can see at the end. You know, some people don't like the tails hanging out. It doesn't bother me at all. I think in the end all things are going to get worn down, and we're going to have to replace this pretty quickly, so we want to make sure that we don't end up putting a whole lot of over effort into it. Alright, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to loop the other side, and we'll come back to show you what I do after that. Alright, so I got both sides of the finger sewn on now. So what I kind of want to do is we want to make sure we secure it down the middle here as well, so the finger doesn't slide like this through and we lose the tip. So what basically I'm going to do here is, once I've got it in position and I know where that center line is, I'm going to take the awl. I'm just going to go ahead and punch myself one little hole right through the fingertip here. And then what I can do is just take another piece of line and sew that through both the finger and the leather and tie it off. And I'll end up with kind of securing it down at the bottom. And you want to make sure, I think it's better, we've tried both securing at the top and the bottom, and we find that securing at the bottom tends to do a little better job. So I'm going to go ahead and do that real quick. So what we've got is I've gone ahead and I've looped it through twice. So I've sewn it through the bottom of the glove and up through the hole, back around again twice, and just tied it off. So now you should have the complete thing on there, and it should be fairly secure. And you'd hope, ideally, that you've got the movement enough that you're not going to worry about that it feels good as you're moving, that you're not getting things caught up and tied around too much. And it actually should be on there secure enough that you should not have to worry about the compression damage to your finger. And actually, it works pretty well as long as you're getting cuts to this angle. Alright, so next we're going to move on to finishing the thumb. We're going to do the thumb piece, and then we'll put the leather on the top, and that should complete the right hand. Alright, so I've got the thumb done. I basically did the thumb in the same way I did the index finger. And so we've got the compression protection a little bit here, but we still need to put a plate along the top to kind of protect some of the joints up there. So we basically have this kind of a U-shaped piece we've got here with holes punched along the top. And then what I'm going to end up doing before I even attach it is I'm going to kind of just take a typical leather hole punch and punch a couple holes here at the bottom as well. Because we're going to use elastic on the back end to secure the back side of it, and we sew the front end to the actual glove itself. So what I have is, you've got two ways of doing this. One way is to actually put the top piece on first, which probably would have been the better way, because you could sew it straight to the leather. In this case, I didn't do that. I put the thumb cap on first, and so what I'm going to do is, I've got holes punched through the rim of the thumb cap, and I'm basically going to sew these two pieces together all the way through. So I'm going to go ahead and do that real quick. Alright, so I've been sewing through here. I basically did the same thing I did with the finger. I tied it off on one end. I sew through the top of the leather and come back through the bottom leather, and just kind of keep that looping stitch going as I get all the way around. And I'm just about down to the other end of it. So far I've been finding it's easier for me to use the pliers to punch the needle through the hole, even though I've kind of pre-punched holes a little bit. The bottom leather is often kind of a little too hard to catch the hole in the bottom, so usually punch it through the top and then use the plier just to push it through, kind of keep that moving. When I get all the way around, I'm just going to tie it off like I've tied off the other ones. Just a couple of overhand knots followed by a single knot at the end. I just did one, but that's probably fine. Then I have the front part of the thumb affixed. You see what ends up happening is I've got the back part stands free so that I'm still allowed to move. I can still move that thumb how I want to. What I'm going to end up doing is taking a piece of elastic and tying that elastic and anchoring it down to the glove so that the thumb will still be able to move, but I'll still keep that thumb cap there pretty tight. Probably at the very end of this I'll dye this back black so that, you know, we don't have the natural leather look there. It's kind of consistent, but we don't have to worry about that quite yet. Alright, so I have it pinned down where I want it, and I've actually gone through and tied off the sinew and went ahead and just did one stitch through. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to keep doing that same looping stitch all the way through the end of the glove and attach the glove to the leather piece. Now, there's a couple tricks that you have to run it. It's a couple little things to consider as you're doing this. The first is the angle that you have to get. Now this is where this is where a curved needle might be very useful because you can come through the hole and come up through the leather. So you could feel free to do that. I've already used my straight needle, so I'll show you how to do it the hard way with the straight one. So basically when you've got the straight one, you've got to get it through the hole here, and then I really got to do is got to turn the leather out underneath so that I can get it through the hole and then catch a piece of leather like that. When I get that, I can just kind of push that through until I've got a little bit of space at the end of that needle, and I'm going to grab it with my pliers, pull that out, and then I'll have it fixed. I'm just going to keep on doing that all the way through. The next consideration is this plastic. And what do you do about plastic? What do you do about gaps, places where you can't? So it's okay if you can't get it. You don't need to sew every single loop in here for this to be stable. In fact, you really only need to do is do a couple every couple of inches and it would be fine. So if you can't get through, if you can't find a place in the glove to get the needle through, just skip it. Just do a loop through just the leather till you get down the line a little bit, and then you can come back up to the leather and it should be okay. I'm going to go ahead and do this, and we'll drop back up, check back here in a second as I'm a little ways down, and I'll show you what I mean. Okay, so I finished sewing across the entire back of it. You can kind of see, maybe you can see from here, there's a couple places where I've skipped because I couldn't get the sewing through the plastic, but it still comes out okay. And it's actually really sturdy. It's not going to come off for the most part. So now we have the top part attached at the back, and that provides the kind of stability. And then what provides the flexibility is we're going to attach the front part with an elastic to the top of the finger. And I found, we've experimented with different fingers, and I found that actually the ring finger works the best. Since the middle finger and the index finger do a lot of movement around when you're, a lot of actually controlling of the sword, I feel like, in some ways. The ring finger actually is a pretty good one for keeping that hand closed. So we'll use that ring finger to control the closedness of the grip. Now you might notice that this one actually did still end up being very long, so I am probably going to trim it back just a little bit when I get down to things. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to mark a place for 2 holes to be punched. What we want to do is we want to kind of we're going to thread the elastic through the tip of that ring finger. And so I'm going to mark where that tip is, and we want that tip to be in a place where, that hole to be in a place where when the glove is about open like this, is about where the holes are. And then as you close the finger, the elastic stretches and provides tension that also helps close it. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of mark, as the glove is in a fairly open position, I'm going to mark a couple holes right around both sides of that ring finger. And then from there, I'm going to do is go ahead and take my punch, and I'm going to punch 2 holes right there. Alright, so I went ahead and punched the holes in. What I used actually, instead of the hand puncher, so instead of this, which doesn't always get around through the inside as well, is I just use a punch kit and a mallet to punch a hole right through into it. And that works pretty well. So then what we're going to do is the same sort of thing we did before when we used the elastic, is we're going to go ahead and take our kind of tapestry needle, thread the elastic through, and we're going to punch that right through the tip of the finger from one end down through the other. So through the entire length of that finger, and then pull the elastic through. And then we're going to thread the elastic up through the glove And the same thing applies to this that applied to the thumb, is we want to make sure that we're not sure exactly how tight we want it to be to function properly. So we are going to just go ahead and tie it off, but leave a lot of slack, and then we can adjust it over time as we feel, and then eventually cut the elastic back. So I'm just going to give it a knot there. I can feel already that this is too tight on my hand. In fact, I can also feel that maybe it might not have punched the holes in the right place. We'll try that. Give it a little bit of slack here. My hand should not feel encumbered as I close it. It should feel fairly natural. There we go. It feels a little bit better. Actually, now it's a little loose. I'm going to keep adjusting, make sure I get it so it just feels just right. And it's fine, you know, these holes aren't going to really do much in terms of structural integrity, so if you really want and you want to punch 3 or 4 or 5, so you can kind of adjust it around as you need it. You shouldn't feel like you've really made a mistake. It works completely fine. Alright, so I've repunched another set of holes. You can see I've got 2 there, and that's, you know, that's fine. And then I've rethreaded it through the second set. And so it closes pretty well now. So it closes. The only problem with this is because the whole glove shifted up, that I've lost some of my finger protection down below. But looking at it, I think both my fingers are mostly covered where they should be. I usually would prefer a little more pinky coverage. So it's fine if the leather sticks out even further beyond the pinky down at the bottom. But for now, this actually works really well. Also notice that I've really tried to curve that leather around the tips so that you've got some coverage around the back side of the tips too. And then when it closes, as you can see here, the hand is fairly well protected through anything that comes down this way too. So for the most part, I think we've got it pretty good. Works really well. Didn't feel that at all. So yeah, that's the right hand. Now when you're doing the left, it's kind of pretty much the same thing. We are going to do the leather caps around the tips of the fingers and the thumb. I sometimes get lazy and I don't put the thumb layering on the top just because it's not a heavy target for me, frequent target for me. It's up to you. Same thing with, up to you if you want to do the other fingertips. The only real difference on the left hand side is the pattern is different. The pattern is designed so that when your hand's in the glove that the index finger can remain independent if you need to. And so the tricky thing about this pattern is this looks like a thumb, and everybody thinks it's a thumb, but it's not. This is the index finger here. And you will definitely need to cut that away somewhat depending on how it fits. But I am going to kind of just open this up a little bit first, just to kind of give a little bit more movement. I just know off the bat that this is going to be this is not going to give me enough. What we're going to do is probably even more of that as we kind of separate that from the rest of the glove. Now what we normally do is after we get the thumb, I'm not going to go through it all here, but after we get the thumb and the finger put on, we would attach this glove on to the back the same way we did with the other one, by go ahead and putting on your hand and lining it up and then tacking it down with our pins. The thing is what we want to do is we want this piece here, this little extended piece, to be the end of the index finger. And so you start with that. So start with lining up that index finger so that the index finger is covered by that piece, that the end of this is at the end of the index finger, which should have a leather box around it at this point, and that the edge of this is at the edge of your hand here. So leads us to this position. What that ends up leaving us with is this leaves us with this longer piece here, which this is going to curl. So we're going to curl this little piece here back around the fingertips so that it curls around like this at the end of the. And then the only real difference when we get to that is at the very end is the way we attach it. So we'll do is we're going to sew the holes on as we normally do, and then we're going to attach 2 elastic in this case. We're going to attach elastic to the fingertips here, keep the elastic cap to here, so the finger cap here to the elastic there, and we're going to attach one either from the middle finger or the ring finger to the back of it here. And to show you that finished product, let me go grab my other glove. So here's my old glove, obviously really well worn. As an example, you get the old finger cap there, and the elastic is tied to that finger cap. And then we've threaded through the middle finger here, and that middle finger is tied through 2 holes in the top here. Same with that split finger design. So that allows for this, if you need to. Which I feel like to me is more of the motion I need. Sometimes that finger extends out more when I'm in the wind, and not everybody feels that way. It's kind of, for me, my hand dynamic tends to be that way. Alright, that's it. Hopefully this will be helpful, and hopefully everybody will be able to get a feel for what it takes to do your own gloves, and I'm hoping that we'll be able to get more and more people in TSG to do them. Thanks.